Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leona Nyariri, and I'm from Art Meets, an art organization based in Cape Town. And we are partnering with the first edition of artHARARE Contemporary Art Fair, and I've been involved with some of their programming. artHARARE is Zimbabwe's first art contemporary fair, centering arts and cultural practitioners from Zimbabwe who work in a range of mediums, including visual art, writing, and music. I also want to acknowledge Michaela Limberis, who's handling our tech support, as well as Precious Moane, who's on admin support. I'd like to welcome you all to this conversation with Duncan Wylie, Gillian Atherstone, and Virginia Phiri. We're really looking forward to having this conversation, which is an introduction to the book Zimbabwe, Art, Symbol, and Meaning. It was written by Gillian Atherstone and photographed by Duncan Wylie. Over a period spanning 30 years, Atherstone began the task of locating, documenting, and researching Zimbabwe's cultural heritage through material forms and objects, as well as through the rich philosophical and oral traditions of the region, the culmination of which is this book, a wonderful encyclopedic document that highlights the artistic, spiritual, and symbolic forms of Zimbabwean culture, as well as the deep and intricate knowledge shared by the people of Zimbabwe. Gillian Atherstone was born in Zimbabwe and has lived there for most of her life. She began her career collecting, researching, and exhibiting African art at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, firstly as the exhibitions officer, then became a curator of traditional and contemporary art in 1979 until 1988. Atherstone curated shows locally, regionally, and internationally, and established the National Gallery's collection of Zimbabwean historic art. When her time at the National Gallery concluded, she joined the private sector and opened galleries in Harare, featuring art from Zimbabwe and other African countries. Duncan Wylie was born in Zimbabwe and is an acclaimed international artist. Wylie has had a career that spans painting and photography. His work has been exhibited at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, Zietsmoke in Cape Town, the Louvre Abu Dhabi, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and Palais de Tokyo in Paris. His work can be found in many collections around the world, including the Museum of Grenoble, the Mudam in Luxembourg, and the Frac in France, and the Louvre Abu Dhabi. Wylie has been traveling back and forth to Zimbabwe over the past 17 years, between 1998 and 2015, to photograph and record the historical traces found in this book. Virginia Phiri is a Zimbabwean writer of renown who is known for writing both fiction and nonfiction. She has written books in English as well as in Zimbabwe's local languages, Shona and Ndebele. She has been known to deal with some taboo topics around sex workers, LGBT communities, unemployment, poverty, education, and health. Phiri has also been influenced by her own experience in the liberation war of Zimbabwe, which she was actively part of from the age of 17. In 1990, she founded the organization Zimbabwean Women Writers alongside other renowned women writers. She also founded the Zimbabwean Academic and Nonfiction Authors Association in 1996. Other organizations she has founded or been part of include the Zimbabwe German Society, which she founded in 1983 and remains an active member, the Zimbabwean International Book Fair Trust, whose board she sat between 1998 and 2004, the Pamberi Trust, where she remained active till the time of the closure of its popular entity, the Book Cafe, in 2015. Women Writing Africa, Southern African region, where she's an associate editor team member. Apart from being a fiction writer, Phiri is also known as an expert of African orchids and has written and published related articles in journals since 1996. She also has an orchid species named after her, Polystachia Phiri. Phiri has had an eclectic career in the cultural and political movements of Zimbabwe and continues to be an inspiring figure. We are honored that she's going to be in conversation with Gillian and Duncan about their book, and are really looking forward to everything that they'll be sharing. So I'd like to open up the conversation to everyone now. And I just wanted to start with a quote from Mama Gillian, sort of in our private correspondence about the book. Mama Gillian had this to say. The book came from experiencing that culture The book came from experiencing the cultural through a lifetime, through artists and their work, through elder specialists in tribal knowledge and history, through the wisdom of the spirit mediums, through being with the victims of political intimidation and violence, and the capacity of individuals to prevail through all this. This is the story of a culture and its principles at risk of being lost to history. Yeah, so I think that's a really nice quote that kind of like sums up the book and really kind of talks about why it started. And I guess I really want to start with you, Mama Gillian, about why you began this project.
I began it from two aspects. Firstly, through joining the National Gallery. Art had always been my passion. And secondly, as you've mentioned in that quote, my passionate desire to understand the African culture, how it was so different to mine, and how it was expressed so powerfully in the contemporary art of when I was working at the National Gallery in the 80s. Sculpture was very much a part of the contemporary scene, and the sculpture that was being produced was enormously powerful, and it intrigued me how there was such a natural affinity with the material, with the stone, that this sort of hard and unyielding substance could be made to express life. It wasn't in any way representative or an image of an object. It was simply an expression of life, as much as music is an expression of life. So it was something within me that desired to understand that consciousness, and it was a long journey, but it was art that opened the door, because art is universal to human cultures. I mean, it transcends time, place. We can respond to cave paintings from thousands of years ago in the same way we respond to contemporary art. Art speaks to what we all share deeply within us.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really wonderful to hear. And also, I'm wondering, with you, Duncan. Like, I know. Oh, I forgot to mention that Duncan is also Gillian's son. So I was wondering with you, Duncan, how did you enter your how did you begin working on the book?
I began working on the book without really knowing it, because, as you just mentioned, Jill is my mum, and she started her first field trips in 1982. So I was going with her, as was my brother Craig, on field trips when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. So I've been immersed in Jill's research. I've seen her talking to spirit mediums, to village chiefs, waiting 2 days to have an interview with the spirit medium. And I was also spent a lot of time in the National Gallery, because Jill was the curator there. And I would also spend time in the archives. So I would look at the pieces in the archives, like Nekwe and Shona or Tonga stools. So I've lived with these pieces all my life. And one day Jill was looking for a photographer, and she hired professional photographers, but they were too foreign to the environment. So I bought a small camera when I was on my first year back from studying in France, and I took a few pictures in 1998, and the pictures just spoke to me so much about what Jill was trying to do, but also what I'd seen for the last 10 years of my life. So I'm not foreign to this environment, and I could be like a very neutral but engaged witness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been a long project for me, in parallel to my painting. Since 1997 or 6, I've been asking photographers for advice, which cameras to use, what lenses to buy, how to photograph these objects in the best light, out in difficult conditions. So it's been a side project, very well thought out since that time. But it's the proximity to Jill and her work that was the motor, shall I say.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that you are saying you sort of learnt on the job in some way. And also just how it seems like it became like such a huge part of your artistic practice as well. And I also wanted to ask the same question of you, Mama Virginia, like what was your entry point into the book or to engaging with Mama Gillian on the book? And what do you think a book like this does for Zimbabweans?
Well, for me, it was a great surprise because I didn't know Jill at all. I had no idea. I actually got an email from Duncan asking me if I could, and I just got confused. I didn't understand. And then when they went on to explain about the project and all, I found it very interesting. And the problem was how difficult it was for Jill to actually have the book published. She was almost through, everything had fallen in line, but it was very unfortunate that those with the money and the funds and everything else to have this book published did not see that it was a gem. It was very unfortunate. As we go along, corresponded, she wrote a bit more, sent a bit of this and that, and I say to myself, well, if people, the so-called big people, big organization or big setups or big do's cannot, why can I not? And I say to myself, there's nothing called a coincidence, which means maybe it was meant to be. So slowly, Jill actually once in a while, she was busy, of course, and Duncan too. But whenever she had time, she would update me on what was going on and how, whatever, and asking each other questions, encouraging. And I've been writing for a bit of time. She has been researching also for a long time. But at the same time, as a writer, I know what it's like. If your book can't get out or can't be published, it's like you're pregnant and you cannot give birth. And you can imagine what it can be. So really, strictly speaking, I'm also busy, but this is a project that I thought, okay, it's meant to be. And when the excerpts that she sent me and all, and I found out what was in, I said to myself, oh my God, this was actually spiritually connected. And it's so weird that this morning in the bathroom, I said to myself, wait a minute, is it possible that I've met Jill somewhere else in another life? I mean, it's like when we talk or when we write to it, it's amazing. It's a gem. It's one of the books in Zimbabwe that we must treasure, understand, look at critically, and appreciate. Of course, other books have been written about the subject matter, but this is absolutely unique. And I must say congratulations to Jill and Duncan. It's been a long walk to get where this book is. And it's been very hard. I mean, the way she expressed even in those few correspondences, I could feel, that it's something that needs to move. You see, we don't get younger every day. We get a bit senior as time goes on. And I'm glad this book is done. Very thrilled to pieces, I must say. And people, it's not a Zimbabwean book. It's a global book. People will know what the culture is, the tradition is, the spirituality, the people and everything else, and Jill with her love, hard work, and really getting down to the roots. I mean, look, she traveled, she stayed with the people, she went everywhere. Other people who actually, or white people, let me use that word, would be either terrified or not so sure or be hesitant, but she was committed. It's not that easy as a researcher of that magnitude to do this sort of work. And also, we live in a world where patriarchy is very strong. But in this case, I mean, I've met you for the first time. She's a very soft-spoken person. She's not as aggressive as I am, because I had to be aggressive in order to get through. But with her coolness and all, she's managed to come out with this wonderful book. Thank you so much. Well, I must say I should thank from our side of the Black people, because our Black people are scared of going into the nitty-gritties. I don't think the spiritual people, the ancestors who will be unhappy if we told our story or said it, but we couldn't do it. But Jill came along and did it. And I'm so grateful. I mean, well, I look very westernized, and I think I am too, but I'm very spiritual too, from the background of my family, of my mother especially. My father's people were entrepreneurs, business people who like to do also. My mother's father was a chief, and traditionally in the background, my house is like a museum. I've been in my house for 31 years. I was saying to myself, oh my God, I'm surrounded by all these objects, these trinkets and all of the traditional nature from everywhere, in every part of Zimbabwe, including, I got terrified when I was reading Jill's book. So I don't know how connected I am. I think in a way I'm connected to this book as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your response. There's so much so many more questions just came out for me. And the last thing you kind of mentioned was that you are also surrounded by a lot of these objects, cultural objects from all over Zimbabwe, and I'm assuming all over the world. And I'm wondering, for you to be in a space, such an intimate home space with those objects, what does that do for you? Like, what are the feelings or memories or histories that are generated for you?
Well, actually, some of these objects belong to people who obviously passed on. When I went to Binga in the 90s, I toured Binga, and normally they put these things aside. This is the pipe of peace where the women smoke tobacco, and I think they passed on. So I bought that one, and then I bought the stools as well. And then I could say, this is my house with my husband. The whole house is absolutely full. In the end, he's a very patient man, because at one time he just looks and shook his head when it started, but he stopped doing that. The whole house, where I am, it's in the study, it's full. In the bedroom, in the lounge, in the bathroom, in the kitchen, everywhere. Absolutely crazy, but that's how it is. In fact, this book is so exciting me in such a way that I feel to say, who really am I? I'm excited.
Yeah, and I'm also just wondering, now that we're talking kind of more about the objects, and this is maybe a question for Mama Gillian and Duncan, or even you, Mama Virginia, about how do you, a lot of the objects, when I was looking through the book, they still seem to be in such huge use. Like, people still use them. They're still just regular objects that are used on an everyday basis. But I'm also thinking about when these objects are usually transferred sometimes to museum spaces, and then they're relegated in these like plinths or boxes, and they're just things that you're supposed to look at and not touch or engage with. I know, Mama Gillian, you worked at the National Gallery, and I'm wondering, like, if you can comment about that difference in what happens to these objects when they're removed from their sort of like used environment and then into a museum space.
Well, you've put your finger on the very reason why it was so necessary to me to go out and photograph these symbolic and practical and useful things in the lives and against the background where they had their purpose and function. Because when you take them away from that, they become just an object, just a pot or a textile or a spoon. But the richness of Zimbabwean historic art is the fact that it's woven into the living spaces of life. It's in the useful pottery, in the ritual pottery, as you say, in the spoons, on the musical instruments. It's part of life. And these objects carried the symbolism, carried a deep symbolism of meaning. So, in other words, it was a text, a symbolic text carried by these objects. And so they were never far from you. They were part of everyday life. So you would be reminded in life of important cultural truths. So that's why it was so necessary to have somebody like Duncan, who had an inner sympathy and an inner understanding of the beauty of these spaces and these things, that he could actually come and capture that feeling of these things and their environment and the human being all as one. And I think that comes across very powerfully in his images. It's not something that I did ask, yes, as Duncan mentioned, a professional photographer, and the images were just dead. It just wasn't. It just wasn't what had to be. So I had to wait for my son to grow up, you know, and both of them ended up being artists, you know, even much to my surprise. And so I was lucky enough that he was able to do this, you know, to capture that image of African art and life. And this is the tragedy of African art pieces in the West. I mean, these beautiful symbolic artifacts are, as you say, stuck on a pedestal or on a wall, and they're static, and they miss, like the masks would be on a body, and the body would be hidden by the costume, and the mask and the costume would be involved in a dance, and music would be a part of it. The whole meaning of the whole event would be what it's all about. So yes, you're right, to remove them from their place of origin, you do lose that sense of meaning.
And what was kind of important for me as a photographer was, it's a bit like when you see these objects in a museum, they're muted. They don't have their context. They don't have their background noise and everything that comes with it. They don't speak as much. They're silent. But the exciting thing for me was seeing these objects in use, and it's like you capturing the whole event and not just, you know, a one-sided sort of flat image. So that was very exciting. But also what was amazing was, for example, the traditional Shona home has like one point of entrance, which is one light source, which is the door, often with a little secondary window, very small though. And so these made almost perfect natural photographic studios, because the light would come in through the door, and with a reflector, I could reflect light back onto selected objects or the scene. So it's all natural light. And what's important is it's it's Zimbabwean light. And as a painter, that's what I react to. So it's exciting for me to see these objects sort of rebooted or recharged by the light of their context. But also what was interesting is the Shona traditional sort of living space is quite a dark interior. And spiritually, I quite like the passage from the dark interior to the almost blinding light outside. You get these two contrasts. So that's throughout the book, there's that use of interior space and exterior space, and like the interior circle or round of the concave of the Shona central living space. And then, for example, the grand enclosure of Great Zimbabwe, which is a huge, big sort of concave space as well. So we start with entering into, this passage of interior and exterior throughout the photographs, and we bring people through the story of the book from the exterior of Great Zimbabwe. We eventually bring them at the end of the book into the interior of a Shona living space, which is a very sacred space, which is, you don't get invited in there every day. So the construction of the book is also about the experience of having access to these things which no one really has access to, and trying to welcome the reader and the spectator into a Shona central living space, or would it be Ndebele or Tonga? So that's the idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost as if what you're describing is basically the narrative of these objects coming from a historical point and then right up into a contemporary moment. And it also just makes me think of in sort of towards the end of the book, some of the objects, they felt a lot more contemporary with the kind of and also of a very specific political moment, especially in how some of the objects showed the AKA 47s and the grenades, and how these had been made into like beautiful objects with very intricate design and patterns. So I think that's also also an interesting way that like there's a narrative of Zimbabwean history that's not just in the words, but then also in the photographs and in the objects. And also, like, I also appreciated how the photographs are really beautiful photographs. And just to touch back on what Mama Gillian was saying about, you know, these objects become dead objects in museums, is where the photographs sort of give full texture to these objects again. It's sort of like you get the full sensory experience somehow. And there's also sort of like a memory attached to the objects. For example, I was showing my mom and my dad the book as well, who both grew up in Zim. And so like the smile on their faces when they saw the book and also some of the objects. And it was like, I think for my mom especially, it was like she could taste like the food being made in the pots, or like the traditional beer that had just been made 7 days ago. So I really like, I think that was a really beautiful way that the photographs kind of interpreted that moment.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I'm also just wondering, Mama Virginia, with sort of like the historical element of the objects, did that resonate with you as well?
Well, actually, I must say Duncan's photography is par excellence, incredible. And also the settings, actually, even if it's people that he photographed, they were so relaxed. It was so natural. They were not under pressure to smile or do anything. I don't know how Duncan managed that one, because it's very rare. You know, people put up fake smiles in order to appear. They were just themselves. I don't know what Duncan did, but absolutely incredible. Whatever it is, if it's a log, it's a log. If it's somebody's, you know, I'm amazing. I went through the photographs, that part of those photographs they sent me, and I was wondering, I mean, this is absolutely incredible. To say that he picked the camera, started actually taking action, you know, helping his mom to get along. This is fantastic. You mean this sort of thing is, you know, it's rare, because mostly you'll find that your offspring will say, well, that's your business, deal with it, and that sort of thing. It's very rare. And we must also thank Duncan for that. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's added value to the book. The text is absolutely par excellence. In fact, what I was reading in there and all those quotes and everything else in the book, those sort of researchers and all that stuff, I've actually gone through those guys in 2008 when I was at a writer's register. It's amazing. I lived 2008 through Jill's book, because some of the stuff she had researched, and I was now saying, there we are. It's now been really confirmed and all that. You see how good it is. It actually makes me feel absolutely incredible. On objects, the removal from there, in my case, I gave an example of the pipe. Mm-hmm. When a person dies in that part of the country, whatever she used to use, like that pipe, for instance, is set aside to just waste away. I just didn't want that to happen. That woman who smoked that pipe is right here in my study on the corner. I look at it at times and I smile. I don't, with all sorts of things. On my right is a stool with all sorts of whatever. Everything. These things are things that are given life when no one else wants to bring them in, because of whatever is attached to that. They are scared that the spirit of this person will sort of, nothing has happened to me. In fact, may those spirits have enhanced me to be many people, to do many things, maybe on their behalf as well. So in other words, it is an advantage. In our culture, in our tradition, that's what I'm saying, most things are discarded. A clay pot, a stool, or whatnot. And in the end, you find, okay, that object has no owner and all, you take it in. In most cases, they are sold anyway. You just want to get rid of them. And you say, okay, I'll have it. And that's how it works. So in other words, the discarded objects belonging to the departed are also brought back into life, and also show people that this exists, and that some of them are almost extinct because they've all gone abroad in museums, like it was being mentioned. There are certain objects which I know no one else has here anymore. Yeah. So that's how in this, you know, the book itself, amazing. The day I'm going to get, I won't sleep. I will just go on and on and on. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, that was me.
Yeah,
when I got it. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
You can't sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You want to know what happens.
Yeah, yeah. It's a page turner.
No,
but
I've
also,
read the pages that you sent me. I went through again. You go through again.
Yeah, you go through it again and again. But also you also have to look at the objects as well again and again, and just get all the details and everything.
We're working on getting them to Harare quite soon, because it's obviously quite difficult to get them in. So we're working on a shipment, hopefully with one of the embassies.
Great.
So yeah,
that would be nice.
We will let you know as soon as we get one there. One is for you, Virginia.
The launch in Harare will be also the most exciting. I don't know, of course there's COVID right now, but you know what? I'm not quite sure. I don't think you can manage to launch it in the gallery. It will be so full that you have to do it in the garden. I'll tell you this now. It wouldn't manage. No one, everybody would love to be there. I can tell you this.
So let's hope for spring. But just to get back to the objects, it's a little anecdote which I've kept. Virginia, you said you don't know how I did the photography, but when I mentioned earlier, I used to play in the archives of the National Gallery.
All right.
So yes, it's been a lot of work, but what I tell myself is, because I picked up some sacred little vials. Mom, what would the name be?
Gona.
I picked up some sacred Gona.
Okay.
And I was 11.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
I was shaking them.
And you took the stopper out.
I took the stoppers out, and I looked inside.
You took a line draft of the sacred oil inside.
Oh my God, Duncan.
Yes, so I have put a spell on myself, and my way of dealing with the spell was to make sure this book got done. So if you're talking about museum context and objects not being alive, well, unfortunately, I was in the archives and on my own. So that object definitely brought a lot of life to, to the book.
Yeah.
It was a good mischief.
It was,
mischief.
Very good mischief. Yeah, and I think that sort of brings me into the next question, which is a discussion around spiritualism. I mean, I know your anecdote is an anecdote, but I think there's really something there in that anecdote. And I'm wondering for everyone, how does the spiritual resonate for you all within these objects?
In my case, well, coming from the traditional whatnot, they mean a lot, because there are certain things, certain ways I have to handle an object. For instance, if I handled it upside down, that wouldn't work. I'll be upsetting the whole system. So I have to handle it in such a way that it's done properly. I can't handle it maybe with the left hand when I'm supposed to use the right hand. I can't actually put it in the kitchen when it's supposed to be maybe in the sleeping room or the bathing room, which is normally in the rural setup, a thatched place or so. So with objects, one has to be very careful. It's psychological, it's how we are taught not to do what, how, and which. That actually comes to also the traditional cloth that we wear, which is not so much of a cloth, but a skin or a loin cloth. It sounds very old-fashioned, but there are ceremonies where one has to do that. In order to attend a certain ceremony or do something, you really have to don, whether it's a bangle or it's whatever. It just has to be right, because if you don't do it the right way, then obviously psychologically whatever you want to do might not work, whether it's, that's how it is. It's a care, you have to just be careful, caring, and really take it seriously, not just haphazardly. It doesn't work that way. It just has to be right with objects.
That's so interesting, Virginia, and it resonates with how I experienced these interiors and the traditional homes way back in the days.
Yes.
There was never an excess of things, useless things. There were only what was necessary.
Yes.
And those things were beautiful, and they were functional, and they were often symbolic. And that points to really a central quality of African culture, that it was the human being who's important in the home, the human beings, not things. And that is one message in the book, that African philosophy is predicated on human being, and who is the human being, and what is the meaning of the human being, not on things and on material things.
Yeah, I remember that passage. Oh, sorry, Duncan, go ahead.
As a contemporary artist, art in the West today functions very differently to well, there's the market, there's the museums, and contemporary art functions with the market. They're almost indissociable today. So for me, on the spiritual side of things, it was very rewarding to see art being actually used in daily life. And as is so interesting to hear Virginia talk, because I kind of, speaking with Jill, the way I say it is like art, these objects, which they sort of function as a tool, keeping society in a structure, and keeping the sort of ethics of society alive and as a subtext. And so it's very interesting to hear Virginia speak as she does, because here art is active and in society in a sort of more spiritual way than it is in the West today. So it's wonderful to see these two different aspects of what art actually is.
Anyway, can I come in on something that happened before we started this meeting?
Of course.
It was going to rain, and there was a lot of thunder coming up, and I was scared of electricity, and I said to myself, wait a minute, now listen, all of you guys, I don't need this lightning. I can't have this lightning. And I was actually, rubbing my hands together, and I said, please, let me do what I'm supposed to do here. Would you let me do it, please? Please, I don't need this lightning. I'm asking. Bear with me, here with me, please go away. The lightning has been going on, it's gone further and further away. I can hear it, but it's gone, it's waiting. Well, I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was so desperate that I could not let the lightning interfere. In Harare, electricity can go, and that can be it, and then I'm done. So you understand how spirituality things happen when you are really, it's like in Christianity, you go, God, please help me. But here I was asking in a different direction, in a different spiritual African way to say, excuse me, I know we need the rain right now, but right now I have to do also some spiritual work. Could you let this go on, please? I mean, it sounds stupid, but really, I mean, that's why I said, yes, I'm very westernized, but at the same time, I think I know who I am, maybe. I don't know, but that's how it is. It's just an example. I'm just giving a real example.
So it's a really profound example, because and it's not stupid at all. Like, I think it's very, very important, because I think one of the concepts from the book I understand Ubuntu was to be that you are a person with other people, but then also with things that are around you. You take a full sort of accounting, and you understand your place in the world is not as an individual who's high up there, but you are in connection with things that you don't see, the spiritual connections. And what you are mentioning, Mama Virginia, it's like you understand that you're part of something, a whole or something like that. And so for you, rubbing your hands, asking what you needed to ask in a different direction, speaks to that spirit of Ubuntu, but in a much larger way, even to things that we don't see, to the spiritual connection. Excuse me. So I think it is very profound. And this is also something that was spoken about in the book, about how in this in our cultures, that the only uh, moments, or the only sort of moments that count, is when a human being understands that they are part of this whole and can sync with it in a very fluid way. So I think what you're describing is exactly that kind of like syncing with sort of a larger picture. So it's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
I think what's interesting here is the ability for people to function in two ways. And a lot of Zimbabweans in the diaspora, and also before that with colonialism, have had to function in two different modes. So to bring it back to the book, what's interesting is, yes, there are the historical pieces in the early part of the book, but just now, Leona, you mentioned towards the end, there's more contemporary pieces coming in. Mm-hmm. And so that, for example, academics, they stop African art. Jill would always say, like in the 1930s, before the colonialism really influenced Central West Africa or elsewhere. But for Jill, it's a continuity. She's always said it's a continuity because obviously art has to carry on. So through the book, yes. For example, if you talk spirituality and actuality, let me see if I can find those the nekwe. So just for your spectators. So for example, the guerrilla war, I'm not sure of the right terms, but obviously during the Civil War, what were known as the guerrillas were, the freedom fighters, obviously. And they were working in conjunction with the spirit mediums, consulting them. This is Jill's field more than mine, but just on an objective level, you've got the snuff boxes, the nekwe, in the shape of a AK-47 for the men, and for the women, which are always the rounder objects, they're in the shape of a grenade. So you've got very contemporary, realistic hardships, such as the Civil War, being incorporated into very traditional and very meaningful objects. And I think that's an important part of explaining how that duality can function. And then what's amazing is at the end, when we make a transition from an interior living space to the paintings of Virginia Chihuata, who's just had a show at the National Gallery, through the very formal, there's a very formal, a huge formal similarity between what was in the central living space and her painting. So I can show you that later, but I think, sorry, Jill, do you have anything to say after my...
Carry
on. Before I lose myself.
No, what you're saying about the nekwe, the snuff containers, resonates with what Virginia was saying, how spirituality is so much a part of the culture. And the spirit mediums, as you say, played a big role in the Second Chimurenga, the War of Liberation. And snuff was, for those who don't know, snuff was an aid to spirit possessions. So snuff would be an aid for the mediums to commune with their ancestral spirits, to ask for guidance on issues connected with the war. I was just giving a bit of background to the snuff containers, and it was interesting that snuff containers are very widespread, or were very widespread in African culture, and the taking of snuff was exactly that, an aid to an increased consciousness, a more holistic consciousness. And they were worn on the body you know, as decorative elements.
Mm.
That's why many of them have got a chain attached to them, or beads.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear Jill talk about all the different aspects of the objects, because I mean, she's been doing it for 40 years with collaborators, you know, in Zimbabwe, like PK Chiuni, one of her long-standing colleagues of over 30 years. So it's just such, for us, it's just such a wealth of information that earlier, Virginia, you said, you know, you don't know how, you know, how this book had to happen, but it had to happen because I couldn't let the knowledge that Jill has garnered as, you know, whether she's white or black, it doesn't matter. She had the opportunity and the how do you say, the diplomatic passport of the National Gallery to go out into all these zones where no one could go to get this information. So I think what's interesting, if we're talking about spirituality here, it's that was something that I personally could not, because Europe has, everything's been documented in Europe since the Renaissance. There's thousands of writers on every aspect of painting, on ceramics. All the techniques have been documented, all the patiners, metalwork. There's guilds who protect their own history of woodwork, ironwork, goldwork, diamonds. But in Zimbabwe, all of this knowledge was about to disappear. As we know, it's always been under threat since colonialism, but Jill had this huge wealth of information. And for me as an artist who, you know, I love sculpture, I love techniques, I love painting, it was essential to document all of this stuff. Stuff is not the right word, but to put on a pedestal Zimbabwean traditional and classic historic work, because there's a whole story no one knows about. Jill can talk to you about the weaving.
Let me just interject here that my knowledge is minimal, absolutely minimal. And the message of this book is a cry, really, to Zimbabweans, to Africans, to write up that knowledge, to gather up that knowledge before it's gone. You know, so that's what, and I mean, you know, all the three cultures would need a book in themselves. So this is like a call to action to preserve this, you know, knowledge before it's lost, to preserve this heritage.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the things I also thought about, and especially with you, Mama Gillian, and your research, and you talking to people from Zimbabwe and going around the villages and engaging with the spirit mediums, was sort of the tradition really of oral history being passed down. And I get the sense that was part of your experience, that you were getting a lot of information through this kind of oral way. And maybe it would be a nice thing to think through, especially with Mama Virginia, who is really comes from a strong writing background. And I don't know, maybe you can both kind of comment on those two different ways of distributing knowledge and gathering knowledge.
I think it would be interesting to hear from you, Virginia.
It's okay. You can go on.
No, I'd love to hear what you say.
Well, I'm from this community. The background, whether I'm Ndebele, Shona, Manika, whatever, the problem is people have sort of like do not want to get involved in doing these things. At times, it's not about money. I always tell people, when you research, when you write, when you look in this sort of thing, it's not like you're going to get tons and tons of money. Otherwise, some of us would be Rockefellers by now. There's so much work that you do for yourself to be able to share, for everybody else to access and have knowledge and be educated and grow and be known as a nation. So really, strictly speaking, it's very unfortunate that it's all about how much am I going to get? Who is going to pay me? I mean, a lot of my research, for instance, on the orchid side, let me be honest with you, I'm not boasting, I've contributed more than 70 articles co-authored. All the research traveling all over this country was on my own. I'm not rich, just an accountant, a little bit of this and that. Researching is, so if Zimbabweans could come together, say we're talking tradition, we're talking spirituality, we are all coming together in this to contribute. It's got nothing to do with money. That commitment, that openness, and that giving themselves, it's like, if that happens, then we'll be okay. People are senior. It's the young people also who must get out there and try to get this information. It's part of they will remain with that. We are going. That's another issue. I think this must be in every family, in every school, in every university, in every secondary school, in any community. Talk about it, discuss it. Your book will be the start. If it's shown, people will, and they'll be very embarrassed that they've not done anything. You've just done a great work that will actually lead into an avalanche of, especially the young people. And we'll talk about it, and I'll talk about it too, by the way. And my networks too, not only in Zim, but global. I've already started thinking of what to do.
Yeah. Excellent.
One of my people I've worked with over 30, 40 years is PK Chioni, known as PK. His photograph is in the book, and he has been passionate about this very thing, wanting to record the customs and the traditions, and he's struggled and struggled all his life. He's in his 80s now, well into his 80s. I mean, he had the marvelous vision of creating a living museum of Tonga and Ndebele and Shona culture out in Mudzi, which is 2.5 hours from Harare. And of course, it was a long way for people to go, but he built a community there. Unfortunately, it was the target of political thugs, and a lot of the things were destroyed, but he soldiered on for most of his life to do this. And I just hope that, yes, this sort of research will flower and come to fruition, and all the knowledge of people like himself will be written down, as you say, by the younger generation. It's them who've got to do it.
Yeah, it seems like there really is a lot to kind of go through in terms of gathering this knowledge and finding ways to document and share it as well. And I think it's definitely an important task, and it even kind of goes back to what Mama Virginia was saying about, do you know yourself? And part of that question seems to align with understanding where you come from as well, and having this knowledge is it seems like a crucial point. I was also kind of wondering about the symbolism in some of the works. I noticed that there seems to be sort of like the form of the circle is repeated a lot in a lot of these objects, like physically, but then also as maybe sometimes as a decorative form. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of the symbols that you encountered and what they mean.
The circle, which Shona culture uses the ndoro, which is the base of a conch shell, and it's been part of the culture for centuries. And although, as you know, Zimbabwe is landlocked, they obtained this shell through trade with the Portuguese on the east coast of Africa for gold and ivory. So, and it's a universal human symbol of life, because life the first life evolved as a cell. That's the first form of life. And a cell is circular. A cell has interior. For the first time, there is interior life and exterior life. So the circle symbolizes the mystery of life, that it is both interior and exterior. And this is also the mystery of ourselves, that we are both physical body in a physical world, and yet we're also metaphysical in our minds. And I mean, African philosophy understands the self as both, this is the basis of Ubuntu, understands the self as both physical body and metaphysical spirit, and takes both the same sides of the coin. So the circle features, it's worn by spirit mediums, it's worn by chiefs, it's carried in the mutsaga, the headdrests. I think I've got a photograph. Yeah,
I think Duncan is showing us.
Yeah.
Oh, you got it. Oh, that's the Ndoro, yes. I was going to show the headdrests.
Yeah, I'll bring it up.
Shona art is known for its beautiful headdrests. So you can see the circle always features on the headdrest, the mutsaga, and the mutsaga is used by chief spirit mediums and elders when they sleep, and it's a symbol that in their dreams they commune and travel with the ancestors. So yes, the circle is a symbol of the dual nature of humanity, that we are both physical and spiritual. I don't know if you'd like to comment on that, Virginia.
Well, I agree totally with you, because that's the issue I was dealing with. And when I went to Accra, I brought a string about 10 years ago. I've never worn that string for a reason that I don't know, and I just kept it. It's up the actual original from Ghana. And I think in Ghana, it's universal, almost. It's there everywhere, like what you're saying. I totally agree with you. But for some reason that I don't know, I would have gone to Sean or off wherever I wanted a reception or so. But that string is a choker, actually, a proper Ndoro, the round, not fake Ndoro as medium sized. I've never worn that choker. I've kept it in, I don't know why. And somebody asked about it, and I was trying to give it away. And for some reason, somebody says, no, you can't. And I said, why not? They're desperate. Maybe they want to use it with some spiritual people. And say, it's yours. You bought it all the way. Keep it. So I backtracked and kept it. I still have it. So like what you're explaining is exactly that.
Right.
Yeah, it is. It's a connection. It's life and past, present, and maybe future too. Everything in.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
You were talking about symbols. And another characteristic of Shona art is the very fine geometric designs on items, objects or buildings, and that marks it as something symbolic. It's on the bakatwa, the ritual ceremonial daggers. It's on the pottery. You find it very much on all the neckware, the snuff containers, and it goes right back to Great Zimbabwe and chevron pattern found on the walls around the Great Enclosure. And the Great Enclosure was the most, it housed this wonderful tower, and next to the tower was this altar. So it was obviously a place of spiritual activities. So it's the symbolism has been a part of Shona culture for centuries, and specifically through the abstract design of the circle, the chevron, and the other linear designs that you see on the sacred items.
Mm-hmm. And I also like when you're talking about symbols and geometric symbols as well. And I also think about so sort of maybe contemporary art as well, especially how, you know, some of these symbols also continue to recur in some contemporary art. And in the final pages of the book, you have a section of contemporary art. Maybe like someone like Portia Javahera, or you mentioned Virginia Chihuata, who both use particular kind of symbols and signs, and they're both linked to spirituality as well.
Yes, very much so. There's
Can
have you got the image, Duncan?
Yeah, can I just rewind just to the end of just to Great Zimbabwe and the walls and the herringbone pattern before we go back to the patterns in Virginia and Portia's work. So what was important for us was to make the link between if you see the because in the Goodzimats there is also the herringbone pattern. And this little fragment of cloth here, it's one of the oldest existing pieces of cloth from like 19th century Zimbabwe. And that is, well, Jill would know where it's worn, but if you can see the pattern on that, and the finesse of that work, that's pre-colonialism, right? But, and then from that, you go to, it's important for us to make this link to, these are the ruins of Nalatali. So you're going from a very small detail of a cloth to a wall hundreds of meters long with the same designs. And for us, we do that to show like the macro and micro importance of how that charged pattern functions to imbue things with their spirituality. So we talk about Great Zimbabwe, but also in the book this year we did Nalatali and we did Kami. So this is, you can see the same sort of, it's almost like woven textile. Like they were so deft with working with the granite. And as we know, Great Zimbabwe has no mortar, there's no cement, and it's still standing 800 years later. So that's, when you talk about the contemporary artists and the use of symbolism in their patterns, well, it's going right back to that. It's a contemporary use. So let me fast forward then to, I think the first image is Virginia Chihuata. And what I do like is, this is one of my favorite pictures because it's quite a contemporary picture of an interior living space and two of Mum's colleagues who are drinking their tea in a very sort of quaint manner. But those teacups, when you see them sort of placed on an interior like this, like the graphic use of those cups in such a magnificent interior, and then you've got the structures of the roof going up like that. And then we get into the and there's the symbol of like a very symbolic female form in the middle of that. If you see the clay shelves, Bill can expand on that symbol. But then he has a closer version with a different living space, but it's almost like the Willendorf Venus if we're looking at sort of European symbolism. And then when we start the contemporary with Virginia Chihuata, at the top, you've got the screen printed interior roof, very graphic, and you've got these amazing screen printed cups, and then the central figure. So that's like the, how do you say it, the passage from the traditional to the contemporary. Okay, Jill?
I think I'll hand the baton to Virginia to talk about the interiors. I mean, the interiors are just such a special place.
Well, the interior, Yes, they are special, especially what we normally call the kitchen. It's really not a kitchen, but that's where everything happens. You know, that's where all these rituals are done, and everything else, ceremonies, all the crucial meetings. And even if somebody dies, that's where they lie in state, not in the bedroom. So the interiors are very, very important, especially that sort of contain the so-called kitchen. Really, it's not a kitchen, should be called something else. It's built in such a way, like Duncan mentioned earlier, that the light in there is limited. So it's intentional that really, strictly speaking, also there's a bit of privacy, open, but at the same time private. The door and the little open, everything that happens in there has to happen in there, and it stays there, and people feel comfortable. And I think that's the importance. We might not think it that way. In fact, I never, until we're discussing now, when I look back when I used to go in my grandmother's kitchen, especially as a child, when you saw all these people rushing in, rushing out, doing this, you sat on the corner. At times you chased away, but being a little stroppy when I always stayed by and pretended to be asleep or something. But absolutely a lot of this interior business, this particular so-called kitchen, which is not a kitchen really, it's a bedroom, it's a living room, it's every, people could have all those fancy other buildings around, but that one is critical, crucial, and everything else. Even at the chief's place, that's my grandmother, of course, was the chief's wife. That's where everything, ordinary people as well. So the interior part has got its own privacy in a spiritual, traditional, and also it's very much respected. In the way it's cleaned and looked after, and the way they use the cow dung to sort of the floors, the walls, and everything, the way it's done, the thatching and all that. My aunt, who was the chief's first born daughter, when people who searched the kitchens were late, she would climb on top of her mom's kitchen and start searching. And for some reason, she would chase them away. She says, I'll deal with this. That was before she got married. She was in her teens at that time. So you can see that this particular place needed the roof replaced, but people were taking their time. And this action has to be taken because things won't move. So
right, what
bedrooms and all are not important, but that particular so-called kitchen, that it wasn't, it's not a kitchen.
no. How marvelous to have that experience in your childhood with your grandmother.
Well, I was, in fact, I've always been very curious, mischievous too, but not in a destructive way. But in that way, I was able to pick some of the things that other children ran away or they sort of were afraid, but I was always hanging around. And I think that has helped me also in my writing, in my research, in my life in general.
Really?
And also somewhere, somehow, it's sort of like maybe spiritual as well.
Yes, yes.
I don't know, but it's hard to tell. Yeah.
I'm sure.
Just wanted to let everybody know that we've hit the 1 hour marker. So we can start sort of doing closing remarks if that's okay. But also feel free if there's any other last comments or things that you'd like to discuss, you can definitely bring them up.
I'd like the opportunity to thank Virginia so much for being a part of this. She has really made it into something special. And I'd like to thank you too, Leona, for coordinating this and for having us all together to speak. And also to thank Duncan for his wonderful insights from a perspective of an artist and how grounded he is in the actualities of things. So thank you to all of you for this event.
Indeed, Virginia, thank you very much. And Leona, thank you. But before anyone goes, I think we need to talk about something quite important, which was when Virginia said, you know, this book had to happen. And there was kind of a confirmation of this recently at the end of last year when through Jill's longstanding colleague, Doreen Sabanda, we managed to get the, because the whole idea of the book is to take objects photograph the objects in the original context in use. And we wanted to make the scope of the book bigger and have more of the trajectory of art in Zimbabwe. We thought, well, we need to get the Shona sculpture in as well. And so then we thought, well, if we get the Shona sculpture in, we have to go way back in time and get the Zimbabwe birds into the book. And thus we asked Doreen Sabanda if there was any way of getting permission to photograph the Zimbabwe birds back in the original setting. And in November of last year, we got the go-ahead from the Ministry of Monuments and Museums.
Chief Executive Godfrey Mahachi.
From Mr. Mahachi, that's right. And so, which was unheard of. And so in February of this year, we managed to choose 4 of the Zimbabwe birds that we wanted. And we managed to photograph these where they were originally standing back in the Zimbabwe ruins. And that is the original bird, bird number 1, which is the symbol of the nation. And I mean, it was an amazing privilege to photograph that bird where it is, but also a view from the back. And no one's really seen this bird from the back, and there's very interesting patterns on it as well. And then on the western enclosure in the top, we had these amazing birds in that enclosure, 2 of them. And I mean, we talk in the end of February when it's supposed to be raining. So, you know, we were very lucky to have, we had like 2 or 3 hours with these birds. So we were very lucky to have, you know, sunshine and just the amount of cloud cover to make the skies interesting and create a few shadows. And then a small anecdote is one of our long-term colleagues, a guy called Ben Mukashambango, he was driving with us in our car on the way down. And we weren't sure if it was going to rain or if all this was going to happen. And a mongoose arrived at the edge of the road and it stood up and it thought about running across the road. And then it stopped and it went back. And Ben said,
yeah,
Jill and Duncan, that mongoose is a good sign, because in Shona traditional culture and Zimbabwean culture, if that mongoose had crossed our path, it was a bad luck.
Yeah.
That mongoose turned around and went the other way. And from that point on, we had the right weather, we had the right, it was amazing. I mean, so many things had to happen. You know, we needed a car that didn't break down. We needed electricity. We needed to find a battery. But you know, Mr. Mahachi and the staff and who's in charge of Great Zimbabwe again? So, Mum?
Gosh, just flown out of my mind.
Anyway, so a big thank you from us, because I mean, that is the most amazing gift of trust that they gave us to complete this project. So I'll try and make it short, but somewhere along the line, like a cultural chimurenga started, the words putting culture and chimurenga together started resonating in my mind. Like if somewhere behind this book, there could be some form of cultural chimurenga, be it for the arts in Zimbabwe or maintaining tradition or just in general for the world, then the message behind the book would have been put out there, I think.
Great. Fantastic.
Yeah. No, it sounds like the ancestors were with you and are with us now. Yeah,
I agree. I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. It was meant to be. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, I won't say much because I've already done so. I would like to thank Jill, Duncan, and artHARARE for giving me such an opportunity. It's not every day that actually right here at home I'm given such an opportunity. All over the world, yes, they do. But sometimes in your own home country, One, of course, Virginia has got a big mouth, as you all know, so people avoid you. But I'm so grateful to all of you for giving me this opportunity. And I will always treasure this one very much. And thank you and congratulations to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Virginia.
Virginia.
I would love to visit you in your home museum.
Of course you can, anytime. Then you can have the botanic garden that we've created over 31 years.
Excellent. We're coming. We're coming.
Of course. That would be nice, of course, anytime. Please, thank you.
I mean, that all sounds amazing. And your home museum, just from you talking about it, sounds like a really wonderful place.
It's not arranged. It's all over the shore. Everything's everywhere.
It's a lived space where you're experiencing the objects in real time as they are used and breathed and smelled and everything. I think that's the part that makes it really special and magical.
In fact, if you don't mind, just hold on. On my desk, can you see that? The Tonga stool, and that's what stays on it from everywhere.
Oh, beautiful.
I don't know if anyone can see it.
Yeah.
I had this for years, and the dust on there as well.
Yeah.
This is the desk where I work from. Yeah. So you can see.
Amazing space.
Can I just say one last thing? Thank you very much for that, Virginia. But I would like to thank the editors of our book. And there's one important thing which we haven't said so far, that the book is in two versions. It's in French and English. So, and you can see how they put Zimbabwe going up on one side and going down on the other one. And I think that's, no book has been done like this in France either. So hopefully that'll bring more interest to Zimbabwe. But also what's interesting is, because Italy is a very hot country with lots of ochres and reds like the Zimbabwean earth and lots of blue skies, they really know how to translate color onto the paper. So it's, the color is very beautiful. They've done a huge work on the color to make it spot on. So thank you to our editors.
Incredible. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just wanted to do a thank you as well from my side and the Art Meets team and artHARARE. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Mama Gillian. Thank you, Mama Virginia, so much for sharing all of your knowledge, all of your wisdom, and for giving us this wonderful book as well. I think it's something that I'm definitely going to keep for a really long time. And I think it's something that as I move forward in my own life and practice, I think it's something that I definitely want to keep with me and continue to think about. And even what you were saying about, people must continue to talk about these things and share these ideas, and that, it's up to us to kind of uphold these traditions and to pass them on as well. And I just wanted to end with this quote also from the book, which I really thought was another beautiful quote. It says, interpretation must come from the collective psyche of Africans themselves before the memory is gone. So I think that absolutely holds true. And I think everything about this book is really wonderful and amazing. And also thank you to Michaela Limberis, who was on tech, and also Precious Mane, who was our admin. So yeah, it was really wonderful to meet you, Mama Virginia and Gillian and Duncan.
Thank you.
Indeed it was.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
All.
Bye.
Bye.